Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Like Gina said, welcome to the May STS Information Literacy Chat. Our speaker today is Michelle Price. She is the Sciences, Health Sciences, and Special Collections Librarian at Livray. Am I saying this right? Livray Library?
Lavery. Mm-hmm.
Library at St. John Fisher College. And she's going to be talking today on chronic wasting disease, the battle between advertisements and science. Take it away, Michelle.
Hey guys, like I said, I love small groups, so this is fabulous. I did prepare like a presentation, right, to move us along, but since we're such a small group, we can stop and pause and chat about this. I will say that this is a library instruction session that I did before COVID, right? I can convert it for remote. The professor chose not to this semester, and I didn't want to push him, but if you wanted a break from COVID talk, this has nothing to do about how I changed with COVID. This is something else completely. So let me just share some screen. Hey, could you guys in the chat tell me where you're coming from? I want to see what weather we got going on here. Let's see where Chrissy is coming from. Cal State. Oh, one coast to the other. Look at that. Pittsburgh, Maine, DC. So East Coast a little heavy here, and then and then can you help me with the pronunciation of your name from Texas? Lorraine? Can you unmute and tell me
Lorraine.
that? Lorraine. Oh, guys, I'm so excited. I was trying to tell my 9-year-old daughter what I was doing today. Like, there could be people from all over the country in this session today. And for anybody who's familiar with 9-year-olds, you can probably guess what she said, right? So I'm excited to have you all here today. And so even if you didn't get a chance to look at the document earlier, you do not need to understand anything about this disease, this chronic wasting disease, to understand our chat today. And really not understanding it is kind of part of the fun of what this was. And so there's my official long title there. St. John Fisher College is in upstate New York, and I'm in Rochester. If you've heard it in the news lately, that's us. So I always want to know when I come to a setting like this, when I look at people's and they introduce themselves, I'm always Googling, how big are they? You know, what's going on at their school? So how are we alike and how are we different? Because I think that really, it's the first thing I want to know. So I just want to settle the room and let everybody know this is how big I am and how big we're not. So this is our campus. And as you said, this is our entire campus. So for those people coming for larger places, this is it. This is us. And so I am actually, let me get my annotate up here, my spotlight. This is our library right here. And so we are central. This is the academic circle here of buildings. And then as you go out here, you see a lot of playing fields. We are home to the summer camp for the Buffalo Bills. So we do have a lot of athletic facilities for a small college. Now I say college, but we are growing. We officially got changed to a DRU, although we are heavily residential for our undergraduate population. So we're really going through this kind of identity piece moving forward. You know, what is this growing graduate population? We're known for this residential piece. And as you can see here, we are one library for the campus. Now inside we have 9 librarians, that's including the director, professional librarians that serve the college, and we have a really strong library liaison program. And so every major on campus has a library liaison that's attached to it. And then we also have different levels of liaisonship. So we have regular, enhanced, and subject. Now, I'm sure that there's a lot of people in the audience today that wear many hats at work. You can see from my title that I wear a lot of hats too. So I am a liaison to, hold on one second. I just got Kimberly up on my screen. I wanted to be able to see everybody's faces while I was talking. I am a liaison to the Wegman School of Nursing undergraduate and graduate program, the Wegman School of Pharmacy graduate program. I'm also the liaison to the departments of biology, chemistry, physics, computer science, statistics, math, and sustainability. I'm seeing Kimberly's not, yep, it's kind of like STEM, like just throw her at the STEM, oh, and we'll put her in the health sciences. And I actually really love it for some of the crossover opportunities, but I did want to explain, you know, why I was able to start this relationship and do this lesson. We have this really strong liaison program, and I work really closely with our departments of biology. So who do I work with? Dr. Ed Freeman. Now I asked him if he could join us today, and unfortunately he is reviewing NSF grants today, but I do have some information from him. So he is a professor of biology, and I listed just some of his central tenets here, just so you can kind of know the partner that I have. And I'm very fortunate that I have Ed, who really thinks about scientific literacy. Not only does he embrace embedded librarianship, he has really made me a better teacher. He's trained me to be a better teacher. When we work together and he says, okay, let's have students do this on the syllabus. You go in there and change the date. That's what he'll tell me. When he first said that, I was like, my heart was pounding and I had to go into the Google Doc. But this is a kind of trust that we've built up, and it's taken over a decade. So I don't want people to be like, well, that'll never happen in my institution. This took a really long time for Ed and I to get to this place. And we don't always agree. We sometimes fight about things. Like, I don't get the idea of postdocs. And he's like, I don't. So it's back and forth. It's back and forth. And I think that's just what makes it better. So he really encourages in some of our other collaborations for me to really take ownership of things. So when this instance came up, it was a great opportunity for us to grab hold of. So here is a quote that I grabbed for Ed, and it is so true. I'll mute for a second. Now, hopefully you can see some of that language echoed in Ed's quote here when Michelle and I team up. And this is a really empowering feeling. I consider myself an instructor. I'm not a librarian guest. I'm not presenting. I am a teacher. I have lesson objectives. And so I love when Ed uses this language. To that effect too, he really holds me to high standards though. So it's a responsibility hopefully that I've lived up to with him. Now I put the bolding here in the middle, right? I love that Ed does this. There are many science professors that I'm going to hang out in my science, right? The place where I'm comfortable, push my students, but he really makes them think, so what? How do you have this conversation with your neighbor? What does this mean when you graduate? What's happening in our community in the paper that you can understand with the science? And so knowing that this was Ed, when I came across this chronic wasting disease, I literally, when I was walking through his building, stopped and said, hey, I just want to tell you about something. And so what it turned into was a relationship with the zoology course. Now, biology is one of our biggest majors on campus, but for some of you that might not even be big, right? We have about 200 plus majors for biology. This class is typically in the sophomore year. There are lecture and lab sections. I often hang out in labs that are long, but in this case, Dr. Freeman wanted to do this library piece in the 55-minute lecture course. So that's fast, which is going to be part of the chat today, right? How about Lorraine, since you're on the top of my box, will you unmute and tell me when you're working with classes, do you sometimes go lectures in the lecture class, the lab class?
It can be either. I
And
like
so,
to be in the lab because that usually means I get to work with the students.
and I love labs because they're slow, right? It's a little bit slower. People are thinking and moving around. And so they're exhausting. I've done a couple labs that were like 3 hours. And so I learned what it like to be for them. And then I'm going to go, Katie, you're down at the bottom of my Zoom square. Katie, what is your experience? Have you been with lectures, labs?
I work at a school where lectures and labs are approximately the same size, but I am usually in the lab section.
Well, and Katie, to let you know too, we are trying a new experiment in our physics department where lecture and lab no longer exist. It is one large block and they're both put together. And so I see Amy nodding, and that might be a model that's new to us, but not to other people. But I did want to focus on like this 55-minute, because this is not my usual. I'm used to teaching much longer than 55 minutes. So how did they build the library component? What were the steps of all of this? You know, how does chronic wasting disease and advertisements come in? So I get at my home this twice a month publication called the Outdoor News. It is available across the country. There's different regional versions of it. And one day in October, I was just sitting and I'm reading this and I'm like, huh, this page looks funny. And if I thought it looked funny, I'm like, oh man, what's going on here? So I started to talk to Ed about it. And at that point, he had not heard about chronic wasting disease. So guys, chronic wasting disease, it's called CWD. It's a prion folding disease. It messes with, yeah, Lorraine's nodding. Guys, I'm a teacher first and a scientist last. And so it's a pretty serious disease. And we see it in our elk and deer, right? And so a lot of animals who roam and move. So I was like, is this an article or an advertisement? And let me show you what I saw that day. All right, guys, put into the chat an L for left, an R for right. Which one is the ad? Which one's the advertisement? These were both from the exact same newspaper in October. Oh, and Kristen Cooper saw it. Yes, maybe both, right, left. Our eyes look, the right is automatic. Oh, this is an ad. We've got lots of black color. We've got some logo here. And this is, you know, some text to draw us in. Yes, they are tiny, but this is really just to get your eye to see the major difference, right? So over here, we're seeing key classic pieces of our advertisement over here. And this is where I'll start to blow it up for you. Here's a blown up piece from there. I'll let you guys read for a second. All right, so hopefully you guys saw this, that last sentence, right? Let's be honest, deer in the wild don't get urine injected into their brains. I think this is probably where I put my coffee cup down. And I was like, oh, I need to pause. So what at first glance has more of a shape of an article where we have kind of the big U that we start newspaper things with, we have columns. Here I was like, what is happening? And I know I have the best audience here because as soon as I saw that this was from PLOS One, what were you guys thinking? And I want to see if you're thinking, Amy, what were you thinking when this was PLOS One?
I guess I'm just more surprised that they have the full citation there. It's kind of shocking, like almost never, right? Like maybe they'll have the names of the researchers or like their institution, but not a full citation.
Right. So I was like, whoa, look at this citation. I was like, oh my God, they're pretty serious. And then you get to the next sentence. And so what happened is I was like, oh, PLOS One is open access. So I went to Google Scholar, and then I Googled CWD and deer urine. And the very first article that came up in Google Scholar, and the only one that was open access was this one. And so I was like, aha, I know what they did. But then I had to figure out who's the they. So this was what sparked this whole assignment with the students. And so let me get on to the next piece is the worksheet. So what I did was created kits for the students when they came in, and we were in the library classroom at the time, doesn't really matter, is where they had this newspaper. So guys, one of the cool things I was able to do is I had a copy of this at my house. I called the Outdoor News Publishing Central location, and the woman said, oh, we were just about to recycle our leftovers. Do you want them? And she mailed me all of the newspapers that they had left. So for this activity, we could really have the students sit down, open the newspapers and get that experience of, oh, this is an ad, this is big, this reads like an article, and then I see that. So with only 55 minutes, I really needed to make sure that I was using the worksheet to help me manage time. And so starting with some really low things on blooms, like just comparing. what were the similarities and differences, and then just them tallying them up, right? The one that has like, oh, this one's in columns, this one has a picture, but then asking them to prioritize some pieces. What's the most important similarity? What's the most important difference? And then do some predictions. And as you can see here, after reading Ed's goals, this is really kind of really speaking to Ed's frame about how he teaches class. You know, like what's one question that the public should ask? And the students did great with this. They were like, is it safe for my kids? Should I wash my hands after I hunt? Right? So those were the kind of questions. But then they had to think about, okay, now I'm a sophomore. I'm a scientist here. Like, now what kind of questions should I ask? And this was really one of our affective goals, was to get students to start to think like a scientist, right? Because even as we're a very traditional age undergraduate, so they're about 19 at this point. They're not really thinking of themselves as like a scientist, right? And so this was the front page. Now we did do, and I'll talk about how the lesson progressed through, we did do share outs, but one of the things that Ed has really taught me is that sometimes in librarianship, there's this underlying current of we must address every single person, every single question. You know, we must cover everything and make sure everyone has had a chance to speak. And he's really helped me relax and see in a classroom setting that to be successful, you don't have to do that. And so when I say that we go over this, I didn't have all 5 groups tell me what was the total number of similarities you had, and what I would say, a group in the back, what did you have for a similarity? The group next to him, what was your most important difference? So that we could spend a little bit more time on the bottom questions, which were a little bit meatier. So this one tiny little worksheet was really helpful for me to make sure that students were staying on task, that they could move through the activities on their own with little intervention from me because of that 55-minute time. But then really, you know, scaffolding them up to some harder questions here. So then the back of the worksheet, same piece. They had 2 pieces of information in their item, the newspaper, and then either one of these 4 things. So again, if I was in lab, I would give every group all of them and make them look at all of the pieces. But since we only had 55 minutes, one group looked at the New York State Bulletin about chronic wasting disease, and then other groups had just one of these items. Now, picking the items was pretty important because I needed it to be clear, they couldn't be tricky, so that when they were trying to see what type of publication it is, it was pretty obvious. Now, I will pause and mention that by the time I get them as sophomores, we've already had like a super awesome first year program for our students. They have library intervention in their learning community their first semester in the fall. We see them again in their research writing in the spring. And I also do a session with general biology. So I'm fortunate that I can come into this knowing that students have had a little bit of background about publication types. So this part was just taking it like to the next level. Now, I'm trying to gauge the room here. Who haven't I heard from today? Come on, we're all teachers. We know how this works. Lindsay, I don't know if you want to unmute and just talk to me a little bit about your experience with the ACRL framework or the standards.
So I am a brand new science librarian.
Woo!
Yes, I am 6 weeks into it. So I have not yet applied the ACRL framework to any teaching opportunities. So I'm not sure how much I have to contribute.
Well, Lindsay, I'm just so glad to have you here today. 6 weeks in, that is super new. That is awesome. Welcome to the profession. And this is, you know, you've been in long when you have to add up the math. I think I'm 16, 17 years in. And so I originally started working with the ACRL standards, information literacy standards, which there was also subsets for everything. And then the change to the frameworks. I tend not to lesson plan based off of the framework, but for those people who are familiar with the framework, I did want to point out that in the questions, there are hints of working towards some of the frames. So like who's writing about this topic, where the author is located, is about authority as constructed and contextual. Who are these people? And in the case of our newspaper ad, it turned out it was actually the company that supplies deer urine. It was a producer. They wrote that newspaper piece. And so then when we look at information has value, as we saw from Amy, sorry, that it was cited, right? Like, who cites in an advertisement? So they were using that trick against us. They were using the information has value against us to try to see the credibility in what they were saying. And I did mix in a lot of book chapters here. And I think that that contributes to the scholarship as conversation piece, because as we think about where conversations are happening, students are like, is it happening online? If not, then it's not happening. And so this was a great example, because two of these were scholarly book chapters, and I'm going to show them to you in a second, of you still cannot get the picture of CWD if you just hang out online. Really, the good stuff is in book chapters. And so again, when we did some of the wrap up, we spent more or less time on some of these pieces. So let me just show you the pieces that I did. So here was a book chapter, and hopefully the clues like chapter 8 really helped them, right? And then the handbook of clinical neurology with volumes and series. So they had some really obvious notes there to help them know that it was a book chapter. I will just point out, because this will become important later, that they had to note where the authors were from. And we can see here we have Colorado and Norway. So as librarians, we're probably like, why Norway? Right? That's what I was thinking. And hopefully some of the students were thinking the same thing. And we did have conversations about this. And as it turned out, when I Googled it, Norway is the first European country to have a confirmed case of CWD. So this is huge. It is across the ocean, and it's over there. So this is why this is coming up, that connection. And then this was another article that I pulled. And guys, the great thing was they didn't need to know how to read a scientific article. They didn't have to dig into all of the pieces here. But what I wanted to do was, we have this really intense article here that is not available freely online through Google Scholar. So our deer urine company couldn't get this without paying for it or connecting with the library. And it has some really great visuals, right? So when the students were asked about what kind of figures or graphs, it just gives them something to think about that's different than a bar graph, right? Like pushing it to that next level. It's not a chart. It's not a bar graph. This is something completely different. And it's logarithmic too. So, I mean, it was a great example for them to start bringing in some of their other disciplines that they were working with at the time. Now, this is another book chapter, which actually uses the USGS map that the New York State used in their document as well. And so the students were starting to see duplication of figures. And if you take a look at the map, why is Colorado so interested in this? So the students started to make a connection. Oh, that's prevalent in the community where those researchers are. Oh, that makes sense that the research comes from where those people are. So you see here in New York, we have a yellow dot. Our confirmed case was in a captured population, so it was not in the wild. But it is pretty bad over here. If you Google CWD later, it's often called the zombie disease. I see you, Amy. And so it's a very slow, painful death for these animals, and it's very contagious. Yeah, Amy, hand raised, loved it.
Sorry, I just didn't want to like interrupt your thought.
No.
But I like the map was showing up into your sources is such a great way to show that scholarship is a conversation where like that shared information base. And so it did, probably the students didn't see both because they wouldn't have been assigned both, but did you like prompt them or get them to see that there were similar sources there?
And this is why Ed is such a great partner, because I'm sure you've had in your life just people you hang out with. And if you've ever cooked with somebody in a small kitchen that you're good friends with, you kind of just move around. And Amy, this is where Ed would pop in, right? And he brings in, as a scholar, how do I connect with other scholars? And so it was really great for me to bring it up, but then for Ed to affirm it and bring it into the science profession. So I've heard people in the past say like, oh, you know, I won't address more than one frame in an instruction session. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, any instruction session can touch the frames in so many different ways. You don't necessarily have to dig to China on a frame, but you can see how just, as Amy said in this example, the students start to get introduced to it, which I think is very appropriate for this sophomore level, for them to say, oh, okay, that's why we have international collaboration. They're concerned about the same thing, because it's really still so new to them at that level. All right, so how did the teaching actually look? And so because it was 55 minutes, we had to come in, we were in a computer lab, the seats were already configured. So handing out the materials, fast and easy, get them to sit down. Then the next piece is Ed and I did want to make sure that we introduced the outdoor news. And let me just check chat again to see where people are from. I think someone's from Pennsylvania, right? Where's my Pennsylvania person? Oh, and I have an Iowa. Amy, you're
That's
from Iowa.
me. Yeah.
Yep. And Augusta, Maine. Oh, Kimberly, you're from Bradford. Yeah. Okay. So Kimberly, when I say hunters, what is the thing that comes into your head? What are some words? I'll tell you what my
Deer,
students.
turkey, squirrel.
See, my students are primarily in an urban setting, right? Even though we touch really close to some other rural counties. So there's a big separation of what is rural. So for our students, I didn't want them to think like this is some unknowing group, right, that fits some horrible stereotype about hunting. And Ed agreed that, so we introduced the outdoor news and its subscribers. And so their media package was fantastic. They told you that most of their readers had a college degree, if not higher. Average income was like $100,000. Most of them owned a boat, right? And so we were really trying to make sure, and I'm a big rural education proponent. That was what some of my work was in my second master's, is that we talk a lot about urban diversity where we live in Rochester. I'm really pulling in the rural. What is it? What does it look like if you live in Steuben County in New York, which is one of our most rural counties? Who is the reader of the outdoor news? So these little cogs here where Ed and I were trying to connect students with, these are literate, wealthy readers that can be very influenced by advertisements. There's a lot of purchasing power that is done by hunters. There's a lot of purchasing. As we've seen with COVID and some of New York State's gun laws, it's a lot of shift of the economy in New York. And so I think that that was a really great start for students to understand that that could be a reason why this advertisement got so sophisticated, right? Maybe they're trying to, throw that full citation in to throw people off. So then we did the share out. And at that point too, there was that great comment about like, let's be honest, deer don't shoot urine into their brains. Ed jumped into this like right into a pool. He had built this lesson. We had built this, but what I haven't told you yet is Ed adjusted 3 different readings throughout the entire semester leading up to this. So he has had, I'm going to have him read this chapter. Oh, I'm going to have him do 2 pages more. And so he just tweaked his readings a little bit. So by the time they got to this class with us together, they had enough background science to understand what prion transmission would look like. So he hopped in here with, I wish I could have recorded it. Like now in the Zoom world, I could have recorded it, but this is face to face in a basement, dark room. And he really talked about the prion transmission, and he talked to the students about what are the cells like, what is the mucous membranes like in the nose. And guys, it is much easier. Yes, they could, one cell up in here all the way through. So this was a fabulous moment for the students to see how the science they had been reading about could be applied to a case. And that's really what Ed's all about. And this is why I love this lesson. So we did the second worksheet, and this is where we got into the location. And so this is, Amy, where we prompted them from, did you notice? Where was yours from? Where was yours from? And then, looking back at the maps and talking about that international collaboration. So then, of course, we did some like closing comments. What were they? I have no idea. Right? When you're teaching on the fly, you just like, all right, guys, great job. And you kind of mention the things that they're doing and let them know about how they get out of the room. So we did collect the materials and the worksheets. And as you can see, I work from home. I'm representing New York. If you eat applesauce or you drink yogurt or eat yogurt, it's from New York. That's from us. So I do have the students' worksheets at work. And it was really great to look at their responses to see what the groups were doing. And so we did this in 55 minutes. And then Ed had 2 of those sections. So we were able to do this back to back. So I will just kind of end my piece here with, the reflections. And this is where you're really going to hear my voice, I think. And so I'm trying not to get cheeky. I'm really hot here, guys. It's a heat wave in New York. And so the management and the materials were key, right? With only 15 minutes, I really wanted to make sure that the materials helped me with the classroom management. There's nothing worse than like, wait a minute, what are we supposed to be doing? Right? If that happens, then you got to go take a look at your lesson. Were you putting enough helper text in? Were you using enough direct language yourself? So like, take out a pencil, write this down. And then I remember the first time I said that, it was like magic, and kids like took out a pencil and wrote it down. Picking materials that weren't too difficult, ones that had clues, that was really key. So that really helped spend more time on those conversations that come up about the location, about the actual transmission, right? Can you inject it into the brain? What about the concentrations in a study? Now, this is credit to Ed. The fact that he tweaked those readings really allowed students to have such a deeper connection with the materials. Because otherwise they would just sit there while he explained it and they'd go, oh. What he did is he forced them to figure out the transmission of CWD and then to tell him. In response to that, shoot it into the brain. So he's like, remember what you read, what comes next, what happens. So it was really wonderful moments. Now, will these sophomore students remember this lesson? Probably not, right? We're like one day in their entire world. I know how awesome it was for them. That's good enough for me. It was really good moments that they had there. Which brings me to the next point, is there was actually 2 other sections of zoology that I did not do this in. And then people always say, well, how could you scale this up? I really think that there is value in non-scalable course enhancements. This is a place for you to experiment with new teaching techniques, right? This was an opportunity for me to practice how to put together a bundle of materials, how to streamline a worksheet for 55 minutes that touched upon all these different things that weren't like searching in the library catalog. And so I didn't let the fact that it wasn't in the other sections, drag me down. It was a wonderful experience for me, and for the students. Now, the other piece is I don't really know the lifespan of CWD. Is this like here today, gone tomorrow? I don't really think so. Yeah, Lorraine's saying like, no, it's not. It's not. But I think that there's value as librarians for us to explore timely topics that might expire. It's very scary to devote our time into investigating something enough that we understand it to put together an instruction session and be like, oh, well, this isn't going to be good in like X number of years. But when we think about it, faculty are called upon to do this all the time, right? There's the basic science that we're doing, the concepts or application, and then here's this new thing that's happening in the world that ties it all together. And so I was just really fortunate that I had this relationship with Ed, that CWD and this advertisement came up, and it was such a great example of really information literacy and scientific literacy that even if it expires, I had to go for it because it was such a great tie-in. Oh, and I think that was me. So let me see if I missed anything. I think as librarians, sometimes we're too hard on ourselves for classes. And so I felt like this was a super success that Ed and I did. I hope to do it again in the future. We had talked about doing it on Zoom synchronously, and it could. I had some people do some scanning for me, obviously, for today. So we'll see where this lesson goes in the future. So this is just a little bit about me. Yay. the fact that I love to teach. I teach a lot each year. And I'm thankful for that degree in secondary ed that helped me get through some of those pieces. And that was while I was at Southeast Missouri State. I'm trying to see, I don't think anybody was from Missouri today. Yes, I assume Kristen's comments here about Minnesota and Wisconsin. Yeah, the hunting industry is really influential, very much so for legislation as well. And I see Christy talking about, yeah, an Indiana deer hunter. So I think this topic had a lot of political context to it and a lot of social context for students. So while it was 55 minutes for them, it felt really good for me to wrap that all up together. All right, guys, that is the end of my prepared stuff. And so, Kristen, what do we do now? How do we do this next piece?
Well, it's really kind of up to you. We can, since we have a smaller group, if people just want to unmute to ask questions, we can go ahead and do that, or people can put them in the chat. You know, if there are any particular areas that people want to know more about, or just kind of general conversation from it. Yeah, I actually, like, one thing that came to mind during this was I grew up in Wisconsin, and I'm about an hour and a half from where I am currently in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And yeah, the number of deer hunters, and how big a deal chronic wasting disease has been. But like, I don't think I'll ever forget even in high school, like it got to be around that Thanksgiving break and the hunting season would start, and the halls of my high school would just kind of empty out because kids were going out hunting with their parents for deer. And it was funny because we'd come back after break and you could tell who had gotten a deer and who hadn't based on how many they were, or if they were sulking.
Yeah, well, yeah, Chris and I can, my first professional job, full-time job, was in Southeast Missouri State University, and that's where I got my secondary ed degree. So I was doing my master's with classroom teachers, and they often, schools there canceled class on the first day of hunting. That was because most of the staff wouldn't attend. So there were bus drivers, and there was also take your tractor to school day. So people would take their tractor to school day. And there was different conversations too about gun-free school zones, because students would often hunt before school. So it was just a really different universe. And I'm seeing here from, yes, see, Chrissy's talking about take your tractor to school day. And yes, in rural Michigan. So guys, I love this talk about rural pieces, and I'm so glad I could bring this to St. John Fisher College. We're located in Pittsford, which is an affluent suburb just outside of Rochester. We're predominantly white, and we recruit from about 100-mile radius. And so for me, this lesson was just really interesting on so many different levels for students. And you guys are making me fall in love with it all over again. I'm like, I can't wait to teach this again. Was anybody thinking about does anybody have an Ed Freeman that you work well with, or a person that you might have had a level of trust with? And you can share a little bit about what it's like to make that relationship or work with that person.
You did make me think of some years past when there was a group of a class for engineering, mechanical engineering. This was their design class, very important in the program, and the same professor again and again, and he would interact with me as I presented. It was very much a lecture sort of presentation, but he added comments that I thought really made the content meaningful for the students. He would say, oh, you need to know about that because you'll need to it wasn't as good at all as what you were doing, but I thought of it whenever you were presenting. It's good to have that kind of conversation, even though it's a lecture. It was still a two people interaction sort of thing that made it better.
Lorraine, I would say that was co-teaching. You guys were co-teaching, showing the students respect for the different point of views, tying them together. I think that's really important for students to see when they think about us, who we are professionally. When I work with the science classes now, and if I'm in their course management system, I don't like for them to use the word library instruction or information literacy session, because that's what they would say. They would, oh, this is your information literacy session with so-and-so. So I've actually adopted week 3, Michelle Price. Like, and so it's just the same as any other week. So week 1, they did this, week 2, they did this, week 3, they have pre-class readings with me, then they have their in-class stuff, and then they have to hand things in. And it was amazing, Lorraine, how that changed everything for me too. And for the students, it wasn't like a jarring separate thing. It was just like, oh, this is week 3. It felt really great. So do I have lots of eds? I heard somebody say, no, I don't have ed. No, I don't have lots of eds, right? But I do want to make sure that I cultivate those relationships that could be eds, that could be Ed Freemans.
Yeah, I'm Chrissy from Chico State, and I'm actually doing, hey Kristen, nice to see you in real life. I was just emailing with Kristen. I'm doing this next month, and my ed is Logan Smith, and I will be talking about him next month as well in our chat. And I think that my situation is very different from yours, Michelle. You have credentials in teaching, and like you really know your stuff, and I do not. I'm a brand new STEM librarian and also have this much teaching experience. So I come into spaces often with faculty as presuming partnerships, and that's worked really well for me because, and this again is just one strategy that might not work for anyone else, but there is kind of an understanding that I know my stuff on the library side, and I understand that they know their stuff really well on the science content and also instruction side. So I've made it really clear that I'm very open to constructive criticism and partnerships. So that's helped me a lot with finding more eds in my world. I've got several in the College of Ag who are just also really excited about the library, and then several in nutrition sciences and biology. So that's my strategy, but
Sorry guys, we do this. This is a culture from my library. It's like the thumbs up, putting the thumbs up. Are you okay with it? So you see me do it a lot. I can't stop it anymore now. I did this like at a meeting with somebody like pretty high up. I was like, I was like, put my hand down. Yeah, Katie's giving the thumb up. Chrissy, I love the authenticity I heard from your voice. From being very young in the profession, you already understood what your value was, and you weren't afraid to say that. I know this side, and you know that side. I remember when I realized, wow, half these people don't know how to teach, right? You know, PhDs aren't really taught how to teach. It's very rare that they've been given training in it. And until they get further on in their career, they're not getting a lot of feedback either from their department chairs. So I think once I realized that, it helped a little bit too. They're like, oh, okay, to co-teach doesn't mean I have to be at exactly the same level that they are or what's happening. I do find that I often work with people early in their career. Then they kind of grow out of me as they take on different things on campus. You know, they start to be like a chair of something or a chair of committee, and they're like too busy. And then they kind of, when all that stops, and maybe now that they're happy at associate professor or they're a full professor, then they come back with this renewed interest on their teaching. And they're like, So with Ed, he's at that phase here. He's done some of those big things. So now he's like, yeah, let's get creative with this. I actually do a class, Chrissy, with him. It's 10 weeks online. The students do something with me every single week. And they're all asynchronous discussion boards that match his course content. And not one of them addresses scholarly articles. It's all scholarly sources that aren't. And so this is like our piece de resistance that Ed and I do. But I think it's because he's in this comfortable place with his teaching as well, that he can feel comfortable about it. Some people may not be. They might see you in the classroom thinking, oh God, she's going to see me teach.
I had an idea through kind of your example of like the topic and how he had changed the reading so that they could understand the topic. I think I fall into the habit where I kind of mind the assignment, or I might go into their Moodle page and try to see kind of what they were doing before I come in, when I try to think of examples for searches and things like that. But it wouldn't hurt for me to just ask the professor, like, what are topics that they are addressing, or is there a theme that's going through, and using those as the example instead, because yeah, that would just, it would be easier to say, okay, is this relevant? Is it not? Does this feel like it would fit if we were doing our project on this topic, instead of, I don't know, just me like picking something that seems like it fits, or going in blind and picking from their topics when they mention them, things like that. So that might save me time, but also keep it relevant to the class.
Well, and think how excited they'll be that you want to know what they're into. And so just recently, I do a scholarly publishing module for our summer fellows, and it's 10 weeks of about scholarly publishing. And I was like, man, I would really love to get some faculty interviews. Oh, we're at the end of the semester. It's been 2 semesters of COVID. Nobody's going to respond to me. So I put some calls out to ask them to talk about their own research. Like everybody responded. And then I realized the power of, so often they might not be teaching. They have all, they're teaching and they have all these other responsibilities. They don't have the time to really express, oh, I love this topic because. So I bet you, Amy, if you did that, they might get super excited to pick it. Kristen,
Michelle,
I'm just checking the chat.
Well, and this gives me I really love what you did. And it gives me an idea for materials, a way to use materials that are a part of our collection that I'm kind of like, it's like, I'm not doing anything with this. Like, we still get a fair amount of trade magazines. And my areas that I work with are the plant sciences. So I have plant pathology, agronomy, and plant genetics, and plant microbiology. And there's still a lot of kind of like trade magazines and these other types of publications within agriculture and the agricultural fields. So it's like, that would be a good place to look for one of these kind of tricksy advertisements that looks like an article, because I'm willing to bet there's probably stuff like that in Wallace's Farmer. That it would be a really great way to use these materials that I'm kind of like, do we really still need these? But and a way to introduce students to this tricksy advertising that I don't know that they're really aware of.
Yeah, I love doing that. The differences between like scholarly research articles and a trade magazine article, because students are always clueless about that one. So that's a nice way to kind of blow their mind in the classroom, because they're like, oh, you actually can teach me something useful. Okay.
I've had a lot of requests from kinesiology at both institutions I've been at to like kind of that finding credible information, but a lot of it's because like, especially a lot of kinesiology students will go to like do personal training and things like that. And they also have a lot of that trade publication or personal blogs and things like that. And that kind of like, how do we evaluate this information? How you're going to find good sources for your clients and stay authoritative when you're out not here, and you're probably not going to be using the research articles directly. So that kind of a similar idea, or like kind of how are we pulling this information, where do we get that good information, as a big, I get direct requests from them on that topic because they see that as a need in their students.
Oh yeah. And so Amy, I've been in classes where it's like each student's coming with their own topic, right? So you're teaching the concept of credible sources, and then they're doing it and you're helping them all out and your brain's all separate. So I've done those classes and they're invigorating, but I also want, after I taught this class, I saw the value in having a common example for everyone to work through together. And so, because at first I was like, well, they won't be intrinsically motivated if it's not their own topic. And then I'm like, oh, but if it's a shared topic, they can at least chat with the person next to them, hear from the other group. They hear another peer explain it to them and like, oh, that librarian just said it, but it didn't make any sense. But that person just said it and now it made sense. So for me, I have to make sure that when I'm thinking about classes, I'm balancing out, is this an opportunity where we should have a common example? Maybe it's just a common example for 10 minutes that we follow versus, all the independent topics. Because Amy, I could see how that would go lots of different directions, right, for students. So it's something I got to think about when I have requests. I know there's a couple other people on the call and they've been contributing to the chat box too. I just want to make sure if anybody that hasn't had a chance to speak, if they wanted to unmute, they could, or if they wanted to add anything into the chat box. And I will say, from what I've heard too, you guys are much stronger in the sciences than I am. Right, I'm the chemistry and physics librarian, but whew, that's hard.
Well, I was the librarian coming in with no teaching experience and no science background.
That is okay. That is okay. Kimberly, do you go by Kimberly?
Yeah, or Kim, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Kimberly, do you want to guess what my undergraduate degree was in?
Probably the same as mine, business.
Spanish. Spanish. So yes, I think when the faculty learned that it was my dedication and inquiry into what they needed, I think once they saw that, they didn't care about the lack of science, because there's no amount of science that I could have that would actually help me, right? If I'm an organic chemist, it's not going to help me for agriculture class. Well, like a little bit, but not really. Nothing would really appeal to all of those people. And so falling back on, because I'm in the exact same place, like, you know, no science experience when I took this job whatsoever. I'm a Spanish major. What am I doing coming in? I will say that one of the things I did, I was very humble about what I didn't know. But then Chrissy very, very clear about what I did know. And that was after years of kind of negotiating with faculty and learning myself about how to push back and say, I hear that you want to do all those 5 things, but we won't have time to put those together. I think we could take 3 of those and we can put that in a session that you have slotted. And that took a long time to kind of figure out, not only literally how to do that in a lesson, but like how to communicate that to professor. And so I was able to like bring the science part in. And one of the beautiful things that happened is the cell biology class, they asked me to teach it. I kept bombing it time after time. And the students said one time, you should really come to lab and make worms glow with us. And I was like, yes, for those of us who don't, Kimberly, you and I are like, what? It is a very common thing to do, to slice up worms. Yeah, Katie's got the heart there. Yeah, whisk them around, you do stuff to them, you try to make them glow to see what part of their body is responding. So what happened from that was I asked to join a summer working group in the biology lab. And my boss let me take an hour a day, and then I used my lunch hour, and I would go to the lab with the other research students, and I did research. And I hung out, and as I'm doing this building is connected to all of my other liaison areas, to pharmacy, and faculty would walk by, stop, look back. What are you doing? The fact of them seeing me trying to pipette, not so successfully at first, I think Kimberly was more than anything that I could have done with a formal background. The fact that I was trying, that I was learning, a couple of them stepped in and gave me pointers, right? It was a really, I would say it was a really big moment for me in my career to be able to do that. So I don't want anybody to think that lack of science or lack of instruction experience will be barriers for forever. They won't forever. It's going to be a little tricky at first. It's still tricky for me for a lot of things. But yeah, they're a pretty cool bunch that I work with. I just tell them when I don't know what they're talking about.
I did something kind of like that when I first started as the plant pathology or plant sciences librarian. I audited not officially, but I audited the intro plant pathology course, which, you know, the professor was fine to have me sitting in the back, just kind of paying attention. And that helped me feel more comfortable with the topic and I felt a pretty good grounding in, okay, this is what this particular department, here's the basics of what they're working with, which I think, even though I have a science background, it was not in plant pathology. So it helped a lot with getting an idea of these are the sort of things that they're talking about. And I found it to be really helpful. And I know that not everybody has the room in their schedule, especially as you increasingly get responsibility as a librarian to audit a full class. But if you do have the option, I found that to be really helpful.
I think I actually, Kristen, just put it on my goals moving forward in my career is to spend some more time shadowing professors teaching. Now, Kristen, I want to be mindful of our time because Gina said we have until 3. So I want to make sure that we wrap up our recording for the May chat. Does anybody have any last comments they want to share? I love all the stuff in the chat that's coming through. This was a lot of fun, guys. This was a great Thursday afternoon for me. I hope it was for you too. Yeah. Thank you, Chrissy.
Mhm.
All right, Gina, will you close us out of the session? Is there something we need to do for the recording?
Nope. I'll pause the recording now, and it should be emailed out tomorrow.
Okay.
Great. Well, and thank you so much for being our discussion leader, Michelle. It was a really interesting, fascinating topic. I think I've learned a lot.
Thanks. And it was so great to talk to a lot of you about rural concepts. That just was straight to my heart. So that was an awesome little side note for me for that session. All right, guys, you guys enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to go out to my 84-degree heat here in New York. I know, and just roast a little bit. I'm not ready for it. Thank you all for coming out today.
All right.
Thank you.